Hello there, welcome to Planet America, now coming to you from the Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello, and we certainly have a situation.
President Trump is doubling down.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation.
The Dow dropping more than 2,000 points.
The feeling was very much anxious.
Ripped us off left and right.
But now it's our turn to do the ripping.
So far, Trump's Liberation Day has mostly liberated Americans from their retirement savings. But is it all a bluff?
And beleaguered Democrats are suddenly looking just a teensy bit less beleaguered. But first,
President Trump dubbed it
Liberation Day.
He announced sweeping tariffs against just about everyone.
Reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them.
Okay, sounds simple enough. And he even had a chart to make it even simpler.
So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset?
Well, actually, some people were upset that those numbers were rubbery at best.
The way they got to those rates, there's the formula. It looks kind of complicated, but it's actually rather simple. They took the trade deficit, the administration took the trade deficit and divided it by the imports from that country to the United States.
that formula still seems confusing to me.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah, look, if I could just take a second to clear that up. There were an awful lot of mathy-looking English and Greek letters in particular in that formula that could do with some more explaining, I feel. Firstly, that TI there represents the change in tariffs for a country. That's simple enough. Then you've got the XI. That means the exports to that country, and the MI means the imports from that country. So in other words, that entire top line is just the trade deficit with a country. That's okay. The MI on the bottom, yeah, that's also imports as well. But here is the bit that no one explains. What are these funky looking Greek letters doing? The epsilon there apparently means the price elasticity of import demand. Sounds like econo gibberish to me, but they've just randomly given that value 4. The omega supposedly means the elasticity of import prices with respect to tariffs. Once again, they've just guessed it would have a value of 0.25. Now, 4 times 0.25 is 1. So in other words, that bottom line of the formula is just 1 times imports. And John, this whole schmozzle is just a super complicated way of expressing the trade deficit with a country as a fraction of imports. And I'll explain a little later on why that is a problem.
Yes, and you can also explain to me what an epsilon is while you're at it. So it seems the bottom line is this is not so much a carefully calibrated series of reciprocal tariffs as promised as a crudely guesstimated tax on America's imports to try and equalise a deficit in the trade of goods, ignoring the services sector altogether, and then slapping a minimum 10% tariff on countries that don't actually have a deficit in US trade, like Australia, and indeed don't have any trade, and indeed are not countries and even lack human inhabitants.
Among the economies hit by US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs announced on Wednesday, some remote Australian islands that are home to penguins, but not people, and a tiny outpost 600 miles off eastern Australia.
While the penguins probably don't care, the bottom line for American consumers is not good.
The tariffs will raise prices perhaps by 2 to 2.5%.
And the markets certainly were spooked.
Tonight, stock markets plunging for a second straight day as the turmoil over President Trump's tariffs reverberates around the globe.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio tried to put a positive spin on things at a rather tense NATO meeting in Brussels.
No, their economies are not crashing. Their markets are reacting to a dramatic change in the global order in terms of trade.
Crash? What crash? Rubio then dashed back to Washington after scrapping his final planned press conference. President Trump has also shrugged off the market volatility. Instead, he's been spruiking his $5 million immigration gold card, a new way for wealthy people to buy their way into America. And of course, the card has a picture of Trump on it.
Trump card, gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me.
So Trump is buying US citizenship for himself for $5 million, even though he is already a citizen and the president Okay.
That novelty-sized gold card looked wonderfully convenient to me, though.
You need a big wallet.
You might be wondering, though, why economists are so bothered by all this, and their hair is on fire. There is no doubt about that. There are a few reasons. Firstly, that table of countries and tariffs that you saw before, that's a real mess. And I'm not even referring to Trump charging penguins tariffs here. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick did at least come up with some kind of explanation for the Heard Island tariffs.
The president put tariffs on China, right, in 2018, and then what China started doing is they started going through other countries to America.
Right.
They just built through other countries through America. And so the president knows that, he's tired of it, and he's going to fix that. So basically he said, look, I can't let any part of the world be a place where China or other countries can ship through them.
So trying to close potential loopholes before they open, that's not a bad idea, although might be a little sus given Heard Island isn't actually a country. Anyway, here's the big problem though. While the administration does pretend that the trade deficit represents the sum of all unfair trade practices, that's just simply not true. What the trade deficit actually represents is purchasing and investment decisions being made by private individuals in each country. So take, for instance, how Trump's been banging on about Japan, for instance. He's been whinging that Japan doesn't take American cars, but America takes millions of Japanese cars. Look, that's true. But the reason for that isn't trade barriers. Japan actually charges no tariffs on imported US cars. The Japanese simply don't want to buy American cars. So given that, how is a country supposed to address a trade deficit with America? Countries can remove all of their trade restrictions and still run a trade surplus. Trade surpluses don't even necessarily measure trade imbalances in the real world because import data only shows the most recent link in the supply chain, and export data only shows the next link. Whereas in the real world, products often go back and forth between many countries during the manufacturing process. So for example, many goods labelled as imports from Mexico or Canada include contributions from other countries like America itself. So those export and import numbers, very misleading. But worst of all, this whole system discriminates heavily against poor countries, especially those poor countries that have one particular export that might be valuable to America. So I'll give you an example. Lesotho's case. It's diamonds for them. They have diamonds. But there's no way Lesotho citizens can afford to buy America's high-value exports in return. Those guys only earn $5 a day. They're not going to buy a computer or a car, are they? So the result of that is Lesotho ends up with a big trade surplus from America, and consequently America is now charging them a 50% tariff, and Lesotho can't do anything about it. They're not the only example of this phenomenon, by the way. Myanmar, Cambodia, Madagascar, Laos, I could keep on going. Those are the kinds of countries that are actually getting nailed by this policy. And I don't think any of those tariffs are actually going to help American workers.
No, particularly the American workers who are wanting to buy Lesotho diamonds at the moment. But maybe all of this is just part of Trump's art of the deal, a big bluff to negotiate better trade deals for America and make global trade freer and fairer. Well, Republican Senator Ted Cruz certainly hopes that is the case.
Tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers, so my hope is these tariffs are short-lived and they serve as leverage to lower tariffs across the globe.
Yeah, they're wishing and hoping, and this tweet from the president's son, Eric, made it sound like a ploy.
I wouldn't want to be the last country that tries to negotiate a trade deal with Donald Trump. The first to negotiate will win. The last will absolutely lose. I have seen this movie my entire life.
Yeah, it's certainly starting to feel as though we've seen this movie before, Chaz. And White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett says that the president's phone has been running hot in recent days.
More than 50 countries have reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. But they're doing that because they understand that they bear a lot of the tariff. And so I don't think that you're going to see a big effect on the consumer in the U.S.
Again, it's the American consumers who pay these tariffs. The president himself, though, has been fueling speculation that he is deliberately crashing the American stock market to force down interest rates, particularly with this post on his social media platform.
This would be a perfect time for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He is always late, but he could now change his image, and quickly.
So, Chaz, once again, we are left to wonder if Trump is crazy like a fox or just crazy.
Well, look, there's nothing crazy about Trump trying to leverage tariffs to do a deal. He has done that kind of thing a lot before. He is good at making deals, supposedly. But if he's also trying to incentivize companies to invest in America, he needs to convince those companies that the tariffs are here to stay. That's why he's tweeting out things like, "My policies will never change," to convince investors it's worth their while to invest in American operations. But if he's just trying to do deals, then the policies and tariffs will change, won't they? So there's a bit of a contradiction there. It's also not great for the economy to have this lingering uncertainty. Will there be a deal? Won't there be a deal? Because right now, the economy is experiencing even more uncertainty than during the pandemic. And uncertainty undermines business activity, potentially leading to recessions. Also, by the way, if he's trying to raise revenue with these tariffs, which at least according to his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he is.
I know what his goal is. No tax for anybody who makes less than $150,000 a year. That's his goal. And that's what I'm working for.
Sounds wonderful. But if you're using the tariffs to replace taxes, you can't be doing deals to reduce the tariff base, can you? So that's another problem with the deal-making theory. Having said that, I think it would be great if Trump could find a way to reduce that tariff load, because it's huge. This is what has happened to the average tariff rate in the last few weeks. They're at 22.5%. That's the highest level since 1909. They're even higher than the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariffs back in 1930, which has been credited for exacerbating the Great Depression. Meanwhile, even before this week's tariffs, according to YouGov, 63% of Americans had a negative view of Trump's economic policies, the highest figure since records began 50 years ago, John. So, doing some deals to reduce the tariffs sounds like an excellent idea to me. And then maybe after he does that, he can stop fiddling around with the economy just for a few seconds, please.
Good luck with that. While many countries hit by the Trump tariffs have been keeping their criticisms a little bit muted in the hope of reaching one of those agreements, China is now using its economic heft to fight fire with fire.
China responded to President Trump's threat of additional tariffs with defiance and its own threat of countermeasures to fight a trade war with the U.S. to the end.
For more, we're joined by Michael Strain. He's the Director of Economic Policy at the centre-right think tank, the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Michael Strain, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. Tell us, what do you think victory in this trade war will look like for Donald Trump, and do you think he can achieve that victory?
I think part of the issue that we're having is that President Trump is not clear about what he wants to achieve, and some of the goals he claims he wants to achieve are in conflict with each other. So I'm highly skeptical that the president will be able to substantially increase manufacturing employment. I am skeptical that the president will be able to refocus the U.S. economy on manufacturing and away from services. I'm skeptical that the president will be able to shrink the trade deficit. I do think he may be able to use these tariffs as a negotiating tool with other countries to get better terms of trade for U.S. exporters or to achieve other goals. And so, you know, as a negotiating tactic, there may be some wins, but the broader economic goals you hear from the president and his advisors, I think, have a very low probability of success.
And what would happen if Trump did succeed in zeroing out America's trade deficit? Is it even an admirable goal?
I don't think it's an admirable goal. The trade deficit, in my view, is not a good measure of economic health. The trade deficit is not a good metric of success for economic policy. We get a lot of good things because of the trade deficit. The trade deficit means that we have large capital inflows from other countries. That capital makes our businesses more competitive. It makes American workers more productive. It increases the wages of American workers. The trade deficit allows Americans to consume higher quality goods and a greater variety of goods. Reducing the trade deficit isn't the goal, and reducing the trade deficit wouldn't, be a metric of success for fiscal policy. The trade deficit, I think, is incidental. So I think this focus on the trade deficit is misplaced.
Some analysts this week, Michael, are putting the odds of a recession in the United States in 2025 now at 75%. What do you think of that number? Is it too high, too low?
I think that's too high. And the reason I think it's too high is because I expect the president will walk back these policies before enough economic damage accumulates that the U.S. is in recession. But the odds of recession are a whole lot higher today than they were a month ago. We have a good idea of how the economy was performing in March. We have a really good idea of how the economy was performing in February. The economy in the first quarter of 2025 was very, very strong. And it would take a lot to cause a recession. And the political consequences of the president putting in place trade policies that resulted in a recession would, I think, be severe. And I'm hoping would be enough of a deterrent so that the president wouldn't actually do that. And so I think the odds of recession are a lot higher than they were a month ago. I think they're still below 50%. That being said, whether or not we have a recession shouldn't be the metric of success here. And I think we are certain to see inflation higher than it otherwise would have been, GDP growth slower than it otherwise would have been, and unemployment higher than it otherwise would have been. And those are bad outcomes for American workers, households, and businesses.
Now, it seems like China has decided to take Trump on with these tariffs. So is it possible that they could win that fight? And either way, how does this end?
No one's going to win, in an economic sense. A trade war between the U.S. and China with tit-for-tat escalating tariff rates will make China worse off and will make the United States worse off. And that is the judgment that financial markets rendered today. Here in the United States, the trading day has ended, and the market spoke with a pretty clear voice about its views of the economic impact of a tit-for-tat escalating trade war with China. If you define winning as the country that blinks first, I would bet on America winning, but that's not a sure bet, and it is a needless policy that will really hurt the outcomes of Americans if we pursue it.
Finally, Michael, if this does all go pear-shaped, what would be the first indicators that we can expect to see of America really struggling? And when should we expect to see those indicators?
I think the damage from these policies is going to show up in the economic data for this month. I think in the month of April, you're going to see higher prices for consumers. You're going to see much less business investment planning. You are going to see a weakening labor market, and the damage is going to escalate from there until the president walks back these policies.
Michael Strain, thank you for joining us in Planet America's Situation Room.
Thanks for having me.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
There are signs the Democratic Party may finally be picking itself up off the canvas after last November's bruising election defeat, after an election for a state Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin that took on national significance.
The Wisconsin State Supreme Court will still have a liberal majority now that Democrat-backed Susan Crawford has defeated Republican Brad Schimmel. Together, the two campaigns spent more than $90 million. That is more than double the old record for a single judicial race.
Yes, you heard right. $90 million to elect one judge. And $25 million of that came from the world's richest man, Elon Musk, who personally campaigned for his chosen candidate, Conservative Brad Schimmel. Musk even wore a big rubber block of cheese on his head to do it.
Thanks for coming.
The whole it's a Wisconsin thing. They make a lot of cheese there. And Elon Musk even handed out $1 million checks to potential voters, in the process making this election a referendum on himself and of Trump. And Musk certainly wasn't playing down the significance of this race either.
It's one of those things that may seem like it's obviously important in the state of Wisconsin, but I think it could actually be important for the country as well. And maybe for the world.
An election for a judge in Wisconsin is important for the world. But then, after the defeat, it looked like Elon Musk could be sent packing.
Sources tell ABC News Elon Musk's days as President Trump's right hand in the White House could soon be coming to an end.
And Trump was doing nothing to quash that speculation either.
I think he's amazing, but I also think he's got a big company to run, and so at some point he's going to be going back. He wants to.
Look, this was a fairly embarrassing episode for Elon Musk. Yes, it was. One moment, he's literally declaring that the Wisconsin Supreme Court race might decide the future of Western civilization, and 2 days later, he's claiming that he expected to lose anyway. And that actually the most important vote that day was to put voter ID laws in the Wisconsin Constitution, even though they've been the law in Wisconsin since 2016. Sure, Elon. So that was fairly humiliating for him. But to be fair, Musk isn't being sacked or anything. He was always scheduled to go in June. When Musk first got the job as a special government employee, it was explicitly publicised he was only allowed to work 130 days a year. So this story feels a tad clickbaity, to me at least.
At least he got a big block of cheese out of it.
He did.
On the same night as their loss in Wisconsin, Republicans did hold on to 2 Florida House seats. One's vacated by the disgraced former congressman and one-time nominee for Attorney General Matt Gaetz and the slightly less disgraced National Security Advisor and Signalgate villain Mike Waltz. But both races did see substantial Democratic gains compared to last November, when Trump was also on the ballot.
Trump won by 30 and 37 points less than 5 months ago. But Republicans won last night by half that or less.
I won last time we looked by 14 points. So I think it's hard to say that's an underperformance.
And Chaz, while all of that was going on, New Jersey Democratic Senator and one-time presidential hopeful Cory Booker was giving a speech. Nothing unusual about that, except that Senator Booker did not stop talking and delivering a very emotional mea culpa.
And so I confess that I have been imperfect. I confess that I've been inadequate to the moment. I confess that the Democratic Party has made terrible mistakes that have given lane to this demagogue.
The demagogue, of course, being Trump. And so Booker continued for hour after hour, for an astonishing 25 hours all told, longer than any speech made on the floor of the United States Senate ever, even eclipsing the infamous 1957 filibuster against a civil rights bill by South Carolina Senator and segregationist Strom Thurmond. The significance of that was certainly on Booker's mind too.
To hate him was wrong. And maybe my ego got too caught up that if I stood here, maybe I could break this record of the man who tried to stop the rights upon which I stand. I'm not here, though, because of his speech. I'm here despite his speech. I'm here because as powerful as he was, the people were more powerful.
And Booker's speech was also very powerful, and a real shot in the arm for his fellow Democrats, although perhaps predictably reporters were more concerned about how Cory Booker managed to hold the floor without pausing even for a bathroom break for more than a day.
I think I stopped eating on Friday, and then to stop drinking the night before I started on Monday.
And that had its benefits and it had its really downside.
At that point, he hadn't even been to the toilet yet. And one of those other downsides he was talking about was almost constant leg and back cramps throughout. But the fight that Cory Booker showed, and the win in Wisconsin, and this growing backlash against Trump's tariffs and the possibility that America could be heading into a recession, suddenly has Democrats a little bit more upbeat about next year's midterm elections. That's November next year. And even starting to think a little bit more hopefully about the 2028 presidential election.
Yeah, I'm not sure Booker's going anywhere in 2028, to be honest, other than maybe the toilet. That was physically impressive, I have to hand to him. But look, I do think that the Dems are feeling quite helpless right now. Generally, they have no power anywhere. So anyone putting up any kind of a fight, even if it's a purely symbolic fight like this one was, would energise them somewhat, and they'll take what they can get.
Yes, indeed. It was a fillip. Back to money matters again now, and it is not just the global markets that have been in turmoil this week. Many US states are in real financial trouble. They literally cannot repay their debts. Here's Melina Wicks to explain why more than half of America's states are now running out of cash.
The US government has an enormous debt problem. But things could be worse. There could be a US state. 27 state governments are going broke, even though it was not so long ago that they were being showered with COVID cash.
States received about $800 billion from the federal government to kick off the decade. That spending obscured long-running issues, but the federal funds given to states will run out in 2026 as a cost of living crisis hits many parts of the country.
Look, we all did a bit too much online shopping during lockdown, but the states have big bills to pay, like pensions. For decades, states have offered generous pension plans to state employees to lure top talent who could get higher salaries in the private sector. The problem? A lot of states haven't been putting enough money aside to actually pay for those pensions. And this isn't new. Then Illinois Governor Pat Quinn was trying to raise the alarm back in 2012.
People are retiring earlier and living longer, and the cost of health care for retirees has soared. So the pool of money is smaller, while the demand on that pool is greater, leaving the current workers to ask whether there will be enough in the fund when they're ready to retire. The problem is the squeeze.
Oh, scary. Unfortunately, Squeezy proved to be an ineffective spokesnake, because Illinois today has less money to pay its bills than any other state in the country. So what can states that run out of money do? Well, one option is to go cap in hand to the federal government and ask for more. Good luck with that. One thing they can't do is declare bankruptcy. Federal law allows cities and territories to file for bankruptcy, but not state governments. They can default, which is a nice way to say they can just decide not to pay people, but then it's not so easy getting people to loan you money again. States can raise taxes, but of the 10 states with the highest projected pension shortfalls, 4 of them are already among the 10 states with the highest state local taxes. And people who have money can always move to another state with lower taxes. Just ask the president. A number of states have taken steps to address the problem by increasing employer contributions to retirement systems, managing how unfunded liabilities are paid down, and taking advantage of surplus revenues to pay down debt. So maybe a series of governors and legislatures across a majority of states will chip away at this problem with bipartisan patience and determination over many years to come. Or maybe they'll keep ignoring a ticking time bomb that's somehow even more scary than Governor Quinn's acting.
And that is all from Planet America this week. Great news for shift workers though, Chaz. We're going to be on at the extra special later time of 10:30 p.m. Eastern next Wednesday following the ABC Leaders Debate. But you will still find us on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook from 8 p.m.
It's going to be adults only and hot. Woo. And you'll find us back here in the Situation Room for Planet America's Weekend Edition on ABC News on Friday at 8 p.m. And that's a promise. See you.
Bye-bye.